So the time has come, finally, to put our cool 3D model onto a sheet of paper and print it out. Now, the way that you do that, there are, of course, many ways, but the easiest way is to use SketchUp's internal page layout program. Now, this is a separate program from SketchUp, but it comes along with your SketchUp Pro license, and the program is called Layout. And some of you may have noticed that it's on your desktop. And there is a Send to Layout button at the top of your screen. Just click that button. And if you haven't saved, it will tell you, hey, save your project. And Layout will open up, and it gives you an option for different default templates. Let's go with an Arch D size, Arch D landscape. And I'm going to go with one that doesn't have a title on it. And of course, you can change the page setup later on. What you'll find when the layout program opens up is that it looks suspiciously like the AutoCAD paper space page layout, in that it's a big sheet of paper and there's a big viewport. You can use the very SketchUp style tools. If you look at these tools, they all look very familiar. It says select, the pencil tool, the rectangles, the arc, all that is basically the same. And you can select these viewports. You can click and drag on them to move them around. Each viewport also has controls that allow you to crop it in different ways. And you'll see there's little arrows that show up. And all you have to do is click and drag on those arrows. Holding down Shift will allow you to make the resizing more proportional. You can also change the proportion of the view if you don't happen to like the way it came out. Often interior views are quite wide. Now, if I want another viewport, the easiest way to do that is just hold down the Alt key on a Mac or Control on a PC and click and drag. And you see how I have a copy. And Layout does like to align these viewports. You see how it gives me that little dashed red alignment indicator? I would go with that. Okay, and you can even hold down Shift to lock it in. Of course, you have to have several keys depressed at the same time. Now, each of these viewports is a view into your model, just like in AutoCAD. If you go over here to the tool palette, and in both the PC and Mac version, the tool palette is up and visible. You'll see one palette in particular, the SketchUp model. You can make reference to the scenes that are in the SketchUp model. Just choose the one that you want from the list. It's not a drop-down list, but a drop-up list. And you can see that the view changes very easily. And we can make multiple copies of these viewports. I'm just going to Alt-click and drag to make one more copy. And now I can turn this one into my floor plan. Now, one thing that is quite true of floor plans is that they are generally to scale. And in our case, we want this to be, I think 1/4 inch scale is probably just fine. You can choose a scale from a drop-down list, in this case 1/4 inch. What you'll see here in the menu, first of all, it knows it's in orthographic mode. You cannot choose a scale for a perspective view, and it won't let you. But the other thing is that this box is now checked. Now what this does is when I resize the window by clicking and dragging these grips, what you'll see is that it does not change the scale of the floor plan. Now that's a little big on my sheet, so I think I'm going to go with 1/8 inch equals a foot. Now, as a rule, you're going to want to crop this fairly close, just because the edges of these viewports are opaque. So there we have our floor plan. It's very nice. One last thing that we can do is we can add back in the shadows. And you'll want to choose a time of day and time of year that are going to be showing off the shadows to the best that they can be. I'm just going to turn this on. The shadows are a little deep, so I think I'm going to go with June 8th instead of December 8th, and maybe closer to noon. And you can see that shadow gives me a little bit more three-dimensional kind of definition. So this is how you can set up your drawings, and you can do this for each of your drawings. You can call up each of the different views in your project, including the reflected ceiling plan and the section views, each by just making copies of these viewports. You should note that the reflected ceiling plan is actually backwards. The soffit over my service counter is actually supposed to be on this side, and this is because reflected ceiling plans are basically as if you cut away a model, removed the bottom of it, and put a mirror down where the floor plan is. That's why it's reflected. Crazy, huh? Well, anyway, we can flip this. Just right-click on it and choose Flip Left to Right. And there you go. We have our reflected ceiling plan aligned with the floor plan. Now, that all sorted out, one other thing that you can do is you can create irregular boundaries for perspective drawings and other drawings just by using some of the drawing tools in layout. For example, I want to make this perspective view a little bigger, but I want to crop it a little closer to the outline of the building because I don't want to have that white area over there. Well, I can just go to my pencil tool and I can draw a shape, and I'll just draw it over here. And the pencil tool will automatically fill a shape. And you might say, well, what good is that doing me? Well, I can select the shape that I just drew and the viewport, and I can force them to clip each other. You just right-click on them and choose Create Clipping Mask. Now I have a little tighter crop around this, and I can use the arrow keys to nudge this over. One thing you will notice, by the way, is that within layout, objects have a drawing order. So for example, let's say I wanted to make this a little bit bigger. I'll just stretch this out, holding down Shift so it stays in proportion. But let's say I want these drawings to not be cropped by this one. I can select them. And you can just hold down Shift to select more than one object at a time. Right-click on them, and then under the Arrange menu, I can choose Bring to Front. And this is very similar to the way programs like AutoCAD work, and this is very similar to the way programs like PowerPoint work and Google Documents, the Google Slides, where you can move objects kind of forward and backward in the drawing. What we want to do is make sure that the plan and reflected ceiling plan remain aligned. So let's select them both at the same time. And I'll drag them over here. And there we go. We've got the beginnings of a pretty nice presentation drawing. Now, we should talk a little bit about layers before I start drawing objects. And I'm going to go to my Layers menu here. And there are several different layers that are default here. One is on every page. And right now, if we go to our Pages menu, you'll see that we're drawing on one of the pages in the project. Let me just stretch this out a little bit so you can see all the pages. Usually, layout comes with a title page. You can see there's even a little title block on there from who knows who. And then it has these interior pages. And this is as if you were putting together, say, a construction drawing set where there's a title page that looks slightly different than the other pages. So you tend to create boards on these other pages. In fact, I'm going to get rid of this title page just because it can be confusing. But I'm going to add a second page just by clicking the little plus sign here in the Pages menu. And this way I can demonstrate some of the layer features here. So when I draw an object, the default layer will only show up on this sheet. So let's say I want to, I don't know, just draw a circle over here. And I want to select the circle, and let's even give it a fill pattern. If you go to the Shape Style menu, every shape can have a number of different features to it. The stroke, which is the kind of line weight, and the fill pattern, we can make it a different color. Or you can fill it even with a pattern if you want. There are even other things. You can make it a dashed line for the perimeter. So you can see that there are all sorts of fun things that you can do. That shape will only show up on this one page. In fact, you can see here in the preview that it's only on that one page. And the reason is because the layer it's on, is just the default layer. If I go and I select on every inside page, And then I draw, let's see, we'll put in a piece of color here down at the bottom of my board. Now this is really handy if you want to do something like have a title block for your sheet. Oh, and it appears that there's some text here. I'm going to get rid of whatever was on this sheet because I don't want any of that. And I'm going to put my own color. If I want to put in some text for my title block, well, you guessed it, there is a text tool. I'll just click on the piece of text. You draw a text box. Again, this is very similar to what most of our programs do. And then you just start typing, and we'll call this best project ever. Now, obviously, the text is a wee bit small. I'm going to use Command A to select all the text. And then I'll go and right-click on it and go to my Fonts menu. And this menu, again, it's like most font editing programs. You can change the size. So we'll make this a little bigger. You can change the text type. Here we go. Oh yeah, that looks really good for this particular project. And the beauty of that is that that text will show up on all sheets. Now we're going to have two sheets in our project, one that has our front desk and one that has the overall view of the space. Okay. Now, one other thing that we can do here, rather than have this random circle, I'm going to have an enlarged view, an enlarged plan view of this front desk area. And I'll just make a copy. I'll just make a copy of this viewport. So I have set this enlarged plan view to a larger scale. The only problem is I'm not actually seeing the front desk area, the service counter. What I can do is double click inside the viewport here, and just like in AutoCAD, you can now access all sorts of view commands. So for example, I can right click and access the pan command, and make sure not to orbit because that will take you out of orthographic mode. And I can just pan into the area that I want to see, double click outside of the view, and now I can set it to scale. And now I've got my enlarged plan view. One last modification or addition we can make to this plan view is to add in some cut lines to indicate that the plan continues, but we're not showing it. And we can do that with the pencil tool. And you can even set this to be a nice high line weight, maybe 5 or 6 points. And just draw your line. And I'll draw the cut line here. You see that's a nice heavy line weight. Get this going. We'll even draw it a little bit past. And you can stretch it out. Now you might be saying, hey, what's going on? Why can't I see it? Well, what I have been doing is drawing this line on this particular layer, the on every inside page layer. Really, I should be drawing on the default layer. That should be my current layer. So I need to switch this to the default layer. Whoops. And I'll just right click on the object and choose Move to Layer Default. And there you go. It shows up on top. And you can select the object, and I'll make a nice copy of it. And then we'll rotate it. To rotate it, you actually have to use this special grip here that is the rotate grip, and it will spin it around. Double click on it to edit the length of the lines. And there you go, a beautiful enlarged floor plan. And this technique can work with any view. So for example, if I wanted to change a perspective view ever so slightly, I can just double click inside it, and now my tools become available. I can change the composition pretty easily. If you decide that you want to go back and edit the original SketchUp model, I have it open, so I can just switch to it by holding down the Command key and hitting Tab, or the Alt key and hitting Tab, and that brings up a menu of all of my open programs. If you don't happen to have the SketchUp model open, you can just right-click on the viewport and choose Open with SketchUp. Now, what if I want to add some titles to these drawings? Layout does offer you handy-dandy little feature called the Scrapbook. I'll just click on that menu here. And the Scrapbook has a large number of kind of ready-made items that you can place in here. There are so many little folders here. You can just, there's a whole sort of collection of arrows. There are cars. Why would you want a car in this particular project? I don't know. But there you go. You can drag them if you want some outlines of cars. There's people. And if you go here, there are different scales of people. It just kind of depends on what you're looking for. I'm going to go with some translucent people at 3/8 of an inch. Go to this collection here. And you can basically click on somebody and drag them into your project. If they are too small, well, they're like other objects in layout. You can scale them. This is a perspective view. So, of course, there is no scale. So I can just stretch this guy out until it looks like it's about the right size. Okay, and of course you can copy them. Whoops. Copy them so that it looks like there's people up and down the stairs. And this is a real fun way to quickly add scale figures to your drawings, because you really should always have scale figures. Well, anyway, the one thing that I'm most interested in, if I go to this contemporary folder here, there are some real basic title blocks that you can use. You don't have to use these, and some of you may find that you don't particularly like the style of these. And if you don't, you can hunt around. There's other ones, or you can always make your own. But I'm going to drag in this drawing title. Okay, I'll click to place it. And you see here that it is basically kind of like a group, which is to say, I'm just going to copy this and make one for the plan and one for the reflected ceiling plan, that each of these is unique. If you double click on it, you can change the text to be floor plan and 1/4 of an inch. I think, no, we did 1/8 of an inch, didn't we? 1/8 of an inch. And you can even change the title block here to be we'll just go with A1. That's fine. So here we can go and we can edit this, and it won't change the other one. We can go with drawing 2 and RCP. Okay, so it's a little tedious. So maybe once you've gotten one to the correct scale and a little bit of the same text, you can come in and do the whole sheet. And some of you may be not quite so interested in having the title in here. I think we can probably do without it. Just get rid of it altogether. There we go. That looks fine. We don't need to number sheets on this particular kind of drawing. Here we go. We'll get rid of it. Beautiful. Anyway, these can be copied using Control-C, or you can just hold down Alt. So add titles to each of your drawings. Also, don't forget, on your title block, you should put your name, the class, all that kind of good stuff, maybe even the date. Now, the last thing that we want to do for our lovely project is to make a sheet of drawings that talk about our front desk. So if you want to insert a new file, it's really pretty easy. Just go to the File, pull-down menu, and choose Insert. Here's my counter, and I'll just click Open. And what it will do, it will place a a single viewport onto your sheet. And like we did before, you can change the view or not. And you can copy the viewport. Again, hold down Alt. And set up your different views of the project. Now this includes going and setting this to scale. So I'm going to set this down to the floor plan, and we'll set the scale to 1/4 inch. No, 1/2 inch. We'll set the scale to 1/2 inch. Now this one definitely needs some shadows, and we can fiddle around with everything, get our different views of this project, and put in some titles. Okay, this one can definitely have a bigger perspective view. Another thing I can do to gussy up my drawing, which by the way, I made these 3/4 of an inch equals a foot. They were a little small, is I can put in a line, and again, let's make sure I'm on the right layer, and I am. I'm going to put in a line for the ground on these interior elevations. This is a kind of old school technique. I'll just draw the line and hit escape to finish it. It's an old school technique. It kind of graphically makes the lines kind of sit a little more comfortably on the sheet. And what you'll find is if your drawings are, if you messed up and somehow aren't aligning your drawings, you can just nudge them up and down to get them to align. And see how much nicer those look. I could also add in title blocks and different scale figures if I wanted. Now, another thing that you can do is add in notes and dimensions. And every drawing, particularly the orthographic types of drawings, should have some notes describing what the materials are, and then dimensions describing how big everything is. First of all, the text works in a very similar way to the main version of SketchUp, which is to say you can click on a piece of text. It has a leader line. You can draw the text off to the side. It has a little tail to it. And then by default, it comes in with a little bit of text that is describing the object that you're pointing at. You can, of course, come in and edit that to be, you know, whatever you want it to read, aged wood planks. But anyway, and then you can select the text, and of course, it is kind of nice to be able to change the size of it. If you just call up your fonts menu, you can make it a little bit larger. So to set the default value for fonts, click on the text tool, but then make sure you change the size of the font first before you go and actually add anything in there so that we can see. And the same goes for if you want to modify the default dimension size. What you do is, let me just put this out of the way so we can see it. Click on the dimension tool, but what you'll see is that prior to the tool being actually putting in a dimension, you can change the default size. And again, 18 is probably fine. When you do dimensions, by the way, the default precision is 1/64 of an inch. That's pretty precise. Half an inch is probably fine for our efforts here. And by the way, sometimes when you get a lot of views in your project, your layout file can start to bog down a little bit. One thing you can do is go to File, Document Setup. And there are a number of things in this document setup, and one thing that you can do is go to the paper sort of panel here, and the display resolution, you can set that to a lower resolution. Usually we want a high resolution for our output, but sometimes this will speed things up ever so slightly. You can also change the units of your project. Normally they are fractional inches, as we did when we inserted dimensions. We set it to a kind of round up to the nearest half inch, and that's fine. One other thing is that in this menu, it will show you all the references that your project is looking for. In this case, we have our SketchUp model, and we also have the desktop model. These can be updated here in this particular menu, and you can even relink if something has gone horribly wrong, or purge out the ones that you aren't needed. Those were image files that were inserted here. And you can also insert image files onto these sheets of drawings. Okay, once you've finished all these different elements, added borders to drawings that you think need it, added heavy lines to the base of elevations, added notes, added dimensions. I haven't actually added a whole lot of that here in this sheet yet. But we are ready to print, but just like other programs, you don't usually print directly out of the program. You print from a PDF file. So Layout offers you that option. You can just go to the File pull-down menu and choose Export. You'll get a little export menu. PDF is the default file format. There are other file formats, interesting enough, AutoCAD file format, which could have some interest if you prefer to render your drawings using Adobe Illustrator. That's awfully handy. Anyway, let's go to the Options button on the lower right here. And what you can do is you can change a number of things, including the resolution. Usually you want the highest resolution you can get. You also can modify how much the images are compressed. Usually we want to go with a better quality. Obviously, the higher you set these, the longer it's going to take to export. And of course, you could run into trouble later on when you go to print. But this is a great set of settings for high quality prints. So click OK and then save. Obviously remember where you saved it, and then wait for the output. And here is my finished output. And you can zoom in on different elements, and hopefully what you'll see is that this is a pretty high resolution image. You shouldn't see too much zigzagginess to diagonal lines. This will print pretty well. One last thing to remember before taking your drawings to print is to open them up in Photoshop. I'm going to open up my board. And when you do that, you'll get a preview of your image. You can set the resolution to 200. Normally the default for layout is to export at 300 pixels per inch, but 200 is plenty for what we do. You can leave the size as is. It will detect that size from the PDF. I'm just going to open that right up. And here's my drawing, and you can see that it comes in very nicely. We are in Photoshop, so if you wanted to add in some features, for example, the reflected ceiling plan, maybe I could put in some tone. You can use some of the Photoshop features, painting, or just adding in areas of tone to fix anything that seems to be wrong. You could also put in titles and other things that you might have forgotten. Anyway, to flatten the image, it's pretty straightforward. You only have one layer in this whole drawing, so you just can go to the flyout menu here and choose Flatten Image. What that will do, it just kind of creates really just one image out of the one layer that's there, but it will significantly shrink the file size and make it a lot easier to print. Then you can save it as a PDF file. Note that you'll have to do each page separately. It only brings in one page at a time.